About a year ago, right after Zong Jingho passed away, I did 2 shows talking about the problems with Wahaha's ownership and the family's inheritance issues. At the end of one show, I said something that ended up coming true. Because the family business was so complex, dividing the inheritance wouldn't be easy, and the fight between family members might just be starting. Now, that fight has really begun. Zong's 3 children from his second marriage are in a serious legal battle with Zong Fuli, his daughter from the first marriage. Both sides have filed lawsuits, one in Hangzhou and one in Hong Kong. Last Friday, the Hong Kong court began hearing the case brought by the 3 children, Zong Jichang, Zong Jili and Zong Jishang, against Zong Fuli. They say Zong Fuli didn't follow their father's last wishes. Before he died, their father supposedly told her to set up offshore trust funds for the 3 of them, $700 million each. But she didn't do it. Instead, they say, she had $1.8 billion in an HSBC account under her name and moved out $1.1 million. So now, the 3 siblings are asking the court to freeze that $1.8 billion to stop her from taking more. They also want the court to order her to set up the trust funds like their father wanted. Zong Fuli told the court she never heard about this instruction from her father. She also said she didn't know how to change Chinese money into US dollars. But here's the thing. The total they're asking for is $2.1 billion, and there's only $1.8 billion in the account. So their father told Zong Fuli to make up the missing $300 million herself. And now she says she doesn't know how to do that. This whole case has gotten a lot of attention from international media. One reason is because people are always interested in rich families fighting over money. But another reason is that, until now, most reports said Zong Jingho only had one daughter, Zong Fuli.
您看，您拥有这么多财富，然后您只有一个女儿，您女儿也可以说她也会拥有这么多的财富，在心理承受能力方面，您觉得她？
我感觉很好，她现在不是也在搞慈善。
Now that the 3 children from Zong's second marriage have filed a lawsuit, their identity as his children has been officially confirmed in court. I actually talked about this last year. Zong Fuli is the daughter from his first wife, Shi Yuzhen, and the other 3 were born to his second wife, Du Jianying. But back then, not many people in China knew, and there were no legal documents to prove it. Now that they've come forward and declared in court that they are Zong Jingho's children, it's legally confirmed. And once this news spread in China, it caused a big reaction. People are always interested in rich families fighting over inheritance. It's dramatic. But more importantly, this challenges the image Zong had built for years, that he was a simple, down-to-earth billionaire with only one daughter. Now that story doesn't seem so simple anymore.
一张是您坐高铁的一张照片，坐的是2等座。
他们认为我是有钱的，就应该坐在比较高级的舱位。
您的生活非常的简单，这点是大家公认的啊。说您是布鞋老总，今天穿的是，
也穿的是布鞋。
一年的开销可能不会超过5万块钱。
现在可能5万块钱也没有了，因为以前我抽烟，我把烟戒掉了。关键是年轻时候穷怕了。
He only spent 50,000 yuan a year, took second-class seats on high-speed trains, smoked 10 yuan cigarettes, had just one daughter, and worked from 9 a.m. to midnight, fully focused on Wahaha and building a national brand. That humble billionaire image really touched a lot of people. But now people are shocked to learn he had a second wife and 3 more children, all of them American citizens. There are even rumors about a 3rd and 4th wife, and maybe 2 more kids. That simple, clean image has started to fall apart. Many people feel disappointed. They supported Wahaha for years, even cheered it on in its rivalry with Nongfu Spring. Now they feel their loyalty and patriotic feelings were taken for granted.
钟闪闪的儿子叫钟树子，是美国籍。那问题就来了，他入籍美国了，他接了班，在中国赚到的钱，你觉得他会放到哪里去？
水，我只喝娃哈哈。你家吃饭就喝农夫山泉啊？白养狼的水这也能喝？
别人我不管啊，以后我只喝娃哈哈。
I saw someone online who kicked over a bottle of Wahaha purified water. Some people said they just couldn't take it anymore. I've always felt that we Chinese, and East Asian culture, Confucian culture in general, have this habit of judging social issues from a moral point of view. In the past, when Zong Jingho built up the image of a humble billionaire, people accepted it. Now, seeing that he wasn't really that humble, that he had a second wife, maybe even a third, a lot of people can't take it. They feel emotionally broken, right? Now, some people are even saying they support the first wife, fighting the mistress, support the official daughter, fighting the illegitimate children. Honestly, I think it's just a mess. But how should we look at this news? Today, I still want to talk about the story behind it. First, did Zong Jingho make any plans for his wealth before he died? From what I know, yes, he did. Before he passed, he held a family meeting, and there were notary officials present. The plan was Zong Fuli would inherit 29% of Wahaha's shares. Then, for the 3 children from the second wife, an offshore trust fund would be set up, each getting $700 million US, and it was Zong Fuli who would be responsible for handling it.
他也福利基金，对吧？所以我后面到时候差不多的时候，我也准备搞个基金，对吧？别人讲，就是中国人始终没有分，不想搞个中秋的这个奖励基金，我就专门奖励科学家。
After this arrangement was made, Zong Jingho passed away. After his death, the family agreed that Zong Fuli would inherit 29% of Wahaha's shares. But once she took over that 29%, she didn't really follow through on the offshore trust fund part. She kept delaying, wasn't very active about it. That's when Du Jianying's 3 children started getting anxious. They asked Zong Fuli to carry out their father's will and set up the trust funds. But Zong Fuli didn't respond much, so they first tried to sue her in Hangzhou. But the Hangzhou court didn't accept the case. With no other choice, they filed a lawsuit in Hong Kong. At the hearing in Hong Kong, the judge said that since the case had already been filed in Hangzhou, they were worried the Hong Kong ruling might affect the one in Hangzhou. So, the court decided to delay the decision by 2 months. Basically, to wait and see what the Hangzhou court says. What the final ruling will be. We still don't know. What's more interesting is what Zong Fuli actually did after inheriting Wahaha's shares. Here's how Wahaha's share structure looks. 46% belongs to the state-owned Assets Supervision and Administration Commission of Shangqing District in Hangzhou. 29% is Zong Fuli's, and 24% is held by the company's Employee Shareholding Association. This structure has been in place since around 1999, after the conflict with Danone. Why this structure? Back then, it was mainly to counter Danone. But outside of Wahaha Group itself, there are also about 200 supplier companies. Among these, a dozen or so are directly owned by Wahaha. The other 100 plus companies don't have clear ownership ties with Wahaha, but most of them are controlled by the Zong family. These suppliers are split into 2 main camps. One is the Hongxing camp, controlled by the first wife, Xu Yuzhen, and her daughter, Zong Fuli. The other is controlled by the second wife, Du Jianying, and her 3 children. These 2 groups of suppliers have deep connections with Wahaha. They engage in related party transactions, like selling water to Wahaha at very low prices, and then keeping the profits in their own companies. How did this structure come about? It actually started during the conflict with Danone. At that time, Wahaha was still a state-owned company. Zong Jingho didn't want all the money going into the joint venture with Danone because the Zong family wouldn't get much of that money. As we mentioned in earlier episodes, Zong Jingho set up many off-the-books companies outside the joint venture, and these companies did business with Wahaha. That's why Danone got upset later. Even after Danone left, this structure stayed in place. But now, it's no longer about countering Danone. It's about countering the state-owned shares. In Wahaha Group, 46% of the shares are held by the Sasak of Hangzhou's Shangqing District. in the very beginning, Wahaha was 100% state-owned. It wasn't until the joint venture with Danone that Zong Qingho gained a 29% personal share in the company. So if all the profits were left inside the Wahaha group, that would mean the state-owned side, holding 46%, would get a huge chunk of the money. And of course, the Zong family wasn't willing to accept that. Their reasoning was, yes, the company was under a state-owned label, but the Shangcheng district Sasak didn't actually invest any money. They just provided the name. So why should they now act like the main shareholder and take away so much profit? That's why Zong Qingho set up a large number of family-controlled companies outside of Wahaha Group, companies that didn't appear on the books. Then, through related party transactions, he made sure that a big portion of the profits stayed within those affiliated companies. That's basically the structure, a system of off-the-record businesses tied together by interest. A financial ecosystem, if you will, that was built to keep wealth within the family and limit what the state could take. When Zong Fuli took over Wahaha Group, she was immediately faced with two major challenges. The first was how to handle the relationship with her half-siblings, the children of Zong Qingho's second wife. The second was how to deal with the state-owned side, the Sasak, and the power that came with their 46% stake. So what did she do after stepping in? The first thing was to clean house. She basically cleared out the key people from her father's time, the ones loyal to Zong Qingho. Since Zong Fuli belongs to the Hongsheng camp, she brought in her own people from that side. One by one, she replaced the old team. The board of directors at Wahaha Group now is almost entirely made up of people from Hongsheng, from production to marketing to R&D, across the board. Hongsheng personnel took over. The original team was pushed to the sidelines. Not only that, Wahaha's main headquarters building was shut down. The entire HQ was moved into the Hongsheng building in Hangzhou. In other words, Zong Fuli was trying to completely merge Hongsheng and Wahaha to make the two function as one. Next, she shut down Wahaha's Food Research Institute. Now this institute actually played a big role inside the company. Every year, especially toward the end of the year, it was responsible for developing new products to go to market. But here's the thing, her half-brother, Zong Jichang, worked at that very institute. He's the oldest of the three children from the second wife, Du Jianying. Since Du was a college graduate herself, her three children all received top-tier educations. All three studied at Ivy League schools in the US. After graduating, Zong Jichang returned to China and joined Wahaha's Food Research Institute as a researcher. But once Zong Fuli took over the group, she shut the entire institute down. Then she turned around and set up her own project, a food research fund in partnership with Zhejiang University. It was a new initiative under her name, and she invested 70 million yuan into it. But so far, there haven't been any visible results, no new product launches, no breakthroughs. According to some people inside Wahaha, there was only one real reason to shut down the Food Research Institute, to get rid of Zong Jichang. And it worked. After the closure, he left Wahaha entirely and went off to start his own business. That's one part of the story. The other part is this. In just the past year, Wahaha quietly shut down 18 of its supplier companies. The 18 supplier companies that were shut down, spread across places like Shanxi, Shenzhen, Chongqing, and Dali, all had one clear thing in common. They were part of the Du Jianying camp. In other words, these were companies where Zong Fuli either didn't have any shares at all or only held a small portion. A lot of people assumed maybe Wahaha was doing poorly, and that's why these companies were shut down. But actually, that wasn't the case. After Zong Jingho passed away, Wahaha had a wave of public attention, especially after the very public dispute with Nongfu Spring. Many consumers started buying Wahaha products to show support. So at that time, Wahaha's sales were actually very strong. Even with business booming, Zong Fuli still made the decision to close 18 of her own family's longtime supplier companies. One supplier in Shanxi, for example, had workers come out in protest. They'd been making around 5,000 yuan a month, but once production stopped, that income disappeared. The company told them to stay and sweep floors, paying just 1,000 yuan a month until they found new work. Some workers even formed a group calling for the plant to restart, but it never reopened. The shutdown was final. Instead of using those suppliers, Wahaha started working with Jin Mailang, an outside company that has no real relationship with Wahaha. That decision made the intention very clear. Zong Fuli didn't want any further connection between Wahaha and the Du Jianying linked suppliers. It was a clean break, ruthless but direct. That's just one part of the story. The other is how Zong Fuli is handling the issue of state-owned shares. During Zong Qingho's time, he had already tried negotiating with the Sasak of Hangzhou's Shangqing district, hoping to buy back the 46% stake held by the state. But the two sides could never agree on a price. Zong Qingho didn't push too hard though, because Wahaha Group, the part the state owns, wasn't the core of the business empire. By 2022, Wahaha's total sales reached over 55 billion yuan, with net profits around 6 billion. But Wahaha Group itself only made around 1 to 2 billion in sales, and just 18 million in net profit. That was only 0.39% of the whole group's earnings. So Zong Qingho's thinking was, if the price isn't right, I'll just hollow out this part of the company. Even if you own 46%, you're not getting much out of it. And in reality, SASAC hadn't received any dividends from Wahaha Group for years. So the issue stayed unresolved. Now that Zong Fuli has taken over the group headquarters, she faces the same problem. It's said that she also reached out to SASAC to negotiate a buyout. But again, no deal was reached. So what did she do? Since the 46% couldn't be touched, she turned her focus to the other 24%, the Employee Shareholding Association. This employee stock system was created back in 1999. At the time, Zong Qingho said that employees should treat the company like their home. They weren't just working for Wahaha, they were part of it. His plan was simple. He would hold 29% and the employees together would hold 24%. Depending on how long someone had worked there, their position and role, they could buy shares for 1 yuan each and receive dividends every year. By 2018, Wahaha had about 11,000 employees holding shares. That year, the dividend was 0.8 yuan per share. Think about it. You paid 1 yuan for a share and got 0.8 yuan back every year. That's a huge return. For many employees, these dividends made up over half of their total income. It was a meaningful part of their lives and their sense of belonging to the company. But in 2018, Wahaha made a big change to the employee shareholding structure. They announced a buyback, taking back all those employee shares. The buyback price was set at 3 yuan per share. Employees no longer needed to pay anything, and Wahaha said it would still give out dividends, but now in the form of dry shares, meaning you'd keep getting dividends even without owning actual shares. These reclaimed shares were then held collectively under the company's Employee Shareholding Association. But after Zong Fuli came to power, she started making moves against that shareholding association. In 2024, her first step was to change how contracts were signed. Previously, Wahaha employees had labor contracts with Wahaha Group. She required them to switch over and sign new contracts directly with Hongsheng Group. Once that happened, employees' salary structures changed. Base pay, job allowances, performance bonuses all shifted, and the dividends disappeared. At the end of the year, Zong Fuli explained to everyone that dividends still existed, but they would no longer be distributed based on years of service or position. From now on, they'd be based on performance. In other words, dividends had basically turned into performance bonuses. A lot of employees felt their rights had been harmed. At the end of last year and the beginning of this year, around 50 people filed a lawsuit against Wahaha. They argued that the 2018 buyback was invalid and that Zong Fuli's new actions further damaged their interests. According to reports, more than 700 employees have now joined the lawsuit. The case is still ongoing in a Hangzhou court. Those suing say that Zong Fuli had the Employee Shareholding Association transfer their shares in one of Wahaha's investment companies to her own company, Hongzhen, a company she controls 100%. The reason this is important is because the Employee Association used to earn dividends through investments in 8 other Wahaha-affiliated companies. These investments were managed through a single investment firm that held 13 million yuan worth of shares. Zong Fuli had all of those shares transferred at a price of 0 to Hongzhen, her own company. Not a single cent was paid. That means before the ownership of the employee shares officially moved to her, she first stripped away their actual value by taking the investment income away. So even if the shares still legally exist, they're now just empty shells. That was step 1. Then, in January this year, she made a second move, trying to transfer over 300 of Wahaha's trademarks into a different company, Hangzhou Wahaha Food Co. Tas, Lei Tatiti. These 300 plus trademarks are the most valuable assets of Wahaha Group. Back during the Wahaha vs Danone battle, the court ruled that these national brand trademarks could not be transferred. They were the soul of Wahaha Group. But now that Zong Fuli is in charge of Wahaha Group's headquarters, she filed to transfer all these trademarks to Wahaha Food Co., where she holds 51% of the shares, meaning she's the controlling shareholder. So the idea was, if I can't resolve the equity fight with the government, I'll just move the company's most valuable intangible assets into my own company. That way, when it comes time to negotiate, the other side has no leverage. But once this trademark transfer attempt was exposed by the media, the Shangqing District SASAC stepped in. They went directly to the National Trademark Office and requested the transfer be stopped. The entire transfer deal was put on hold. So you can see now, after Zong Fuli took power, she really started pressing on both fronts. On one hand, she moved aggressively against her own half-siblings. She tried to completely push them out of the Wahaha system. Even the offshore trust fund that her father had asked her to set up for them, she refused to carry it out. On the other hand, when it came to the state-owned shares held by the Hangzhou SASAC, she tried every possible way to take them over at a low price. And when that didn't work, she began hollowing out Wahaha Group, making it an empty shell with no real value left inside. Now, she's even created new brands like Wahaha Junior and Zongha Junior under her own company, Hongsheng. This is seen as an attempt to gradually phase out the Wahaha name, basically preparing to go fully independent with her own branding, in case she can't secure ownership of Wahaha's trademarks. So overall, what Zong Fuli has done since taking over Wahaha can be summed up like this. She's been cutting off the old ties, clearing the board, and trying to rebuild the empire on her own terms. At the end of today's episode, I want to share a few personal thoughts. First, I do think Zong Fuli is a person who tends to go all the way, even to extremes. Her uncle actually gave an interview and spoke quite directly. He said Zong Fuli doesn't have a generous heart. After all, these half-siblings of hers were left behind by her father. He had already made clear financial arrangements for them. She should have respected that. Instead, not only did she not follow through, she wanted to take everything for herself. Her uncle called her actions ruthless and said she had been selfish since she was young, showing no loyalty to family. These aren't my words. They came straight from her own uncle in a media interview. And honestly, I think that's a pretty accurate description. Yes, it's true that there's always going to be tension between the first and second families. But when your father made a specific plan, giving your siblings $1.8 billion through offshore trusts, and you've already inherited 29% of Wahaha, there's no excuse not to carry out his wishes. Not legally and not morally either. Another thing is, a lot of people used to talk about Zong Fuli's patriotism, how she stayed single and dedicated herself to the company. But actually, she was married. Her husband was Li Lei, son of Li Jinai, a senior military official and former member of the Central Military Commission. Li Lei graduated from Tsinghua University and worked in software. In 2005, he served as party secretary at the Chinese Academy of Sciences Kunming branch. And in 2011, he became party secretary of Dihong Prefecture. At the time, he was the youngest official at his rank nationwide. Later on, he and Zong Fuli divorced. After the divorce, around 2014, he reportedly became a monk. Then, in 2020, he was investigated by the Discipline Inspection Commission. Their marriage didn't last very long. After divorcing Li Lei, Zong Fuli reportedly went through surrogacy in the US. First, she had a pair of twins, a boy and a girl, and later had another daughter. So now she has 3 children, all born in the US, all American citizens. Zong Fuli herself once held a US passport. Her father, Zong Qingho, had a US green card, and she followed suit. Online, she presents herself as the daughter of a humble entrepreneur, unmarried, fully dedicated to Wahaha. But the reality, with her overseas children, her past American citizenship, and foreign business operations, clearly tells another story. Many people feel misled. The company she runs, Hongsheng, is a foreign invested business that enjoys preferential tax rates and sends profits overseas. Even if she later gave up her US passport, the fact that she used her foreign status to set up and benefit from a foreign invested company in China still raises questions. From a credibility and image standpoint, it doesn't sit well. That's the first issue. The second is the 46% stake held by the SASAC of Hangzhou's Shangcheng district. It's true that when Wahaha was first created, the district didn't put in money. The capital came from Zong. But over the years, Wahaha gained many advantages from operating as a state-owned company. So how should that 46% be handled now? It's a legacy issue, and it should be resolved through proper negotiation. But what Zong Fuli is doing, stripping Wahaha of its core assets, transferring over 300 key trademarks into her own company, and turning Wahaha Group into an empty shell, then using that weakened version to negotiate with the government, that approach, morally and legally, feels off. The better way would be to sit down, talk honestly, and agree on a fair valuation. If the government no longer wants to stay involved, it can sell its shares to the Zong family at a proper price and exit cleanly. After that, what the family does with the business is up to them. To be fair, the Sasak hasn't taken any dividends from Wahaha in decades, not even 1 yuan. They've held the shares in name only. But even so, when the time comes to divide things, there should still be a fair and respectful deal. That's the second issue. The third point, from our perspective as ordinary people, is that we really need to stop judging this whole story from a purely moral angle. There's no need to see it as the official wife versus the mistress, or the legitimate daughter versus the illegitimate children. In fact, Zong Qingho's second wife had a legal marriage in the US. It wasn't some secret affair. He just never made that public in China. So if we've already been misled once by the humble billionaire image, let's not fall into the same trap again, using outdated moral standards to look at complicated family and business disputes. You've already stepped in this once. Don't do it again.
我还不知道现在我们的网络的后台啊，还是在美国人手里，还是在我们自己手里？
对，
是吧
？Pony，你回答一下，网络后台在你的手上，还是在美国人手上？Pony 现在很怕看到钟老师。
刚才钟总在开会前已经跟我投诉了很多啊，就是我跟他解释了一下，就说现在的确是处理网上，特别是微信里面的这种谣言信息，是我们一个当前一个非常大的一个压力和任务。
Didn't I already say it? All of Zong Fuli's children are American citizens. So if that's the case, and you're still using things like patriotism or national brand to judge her actions, isn't that just a bit ridiculous? What we should really care about are the real issues. First, how should the state-owned assets in this process be fairly valued and assessed? Second, during the inheritance process, did Zong Fuli actually respect her father's will and the court's rulings? Third, what about the employees who once held shares in Wahaha? How will their rights be protected? Earlier this year, in February, some Wahaha employees showed up outside Hongsheng's building to ask for their unpaid wages. And how did Hongsheng respond? Very rudely. They said nothing like that ever happened. They even denied the existence of the workers' own rights committee, refused to recognize it at all. Their attitude was extremely cold and dismissive. These are the things that actually matter, the issues with real public value. As for who's from the first wife, who's from the second, who's more legitimate, or has the so-called moral high ground, I really don't think that's something the public should be focused on anymore. That's all I wanted to share today. Thank you.
但是在我们的镜头里，宗庆后的午餐却是这样的。据他身边的人说，老板每天的一日三餐都是如此。他简朴惯了，就连出差也是一个人。他1年的花费加起来，很多人可能都不信，因为不会超过5万元。
阿丽现在怎么样啊？
他比较独立，但我也很少管他，让他独立7、8岁。
对他未来的期待是什么呀？
他愿意接班，我认为最好能接班，是把这个事业能够做下去。我们是现在叫追求卓越，争取做个100年老店。
我觉得是一旦跟你爸冲突了，你就是妥协，是吧？
先妥协吧，我也需要先生存下去。
你爸 没有逼你在个人问题上尽快的解决吗？
现在又不是包办婚姻，对吗？我觉得这个结婚好像不是很高端。
作为鸿盛饮料集团总裁，这个岗位是实职吗？
对啊，这是我自己的公司啊。
这个公司你不用请示？
不用，完全我自己说了算。
你爸干涉过这个？
从来没有。
这个公司你觉得成功吗？
我觉得挺好的呀，从精神上给我支持啊，对吧？
外面有说法说是你杀伐决断都很厉害，你不满意 team 不是果断的就换了吗？
对，但是我现在年纪大了呀，就没有这么凶残了。
不转国籍，不资产往国外转，现在呢，3个老婆，4个女，4个孩子，3个儿子，还都是美国国籍，简直就是颠覆我了，真的，还有什么能相信吗？